Okay, so this is kind of an odd situation for me because on one hand, I really enjoyed this movie, but on the other hand, this was a terrible adaptation of a far superior product. And so I kind of have this odd love hate scenario with the new Uncharted film. Things about this film worked great for me, but other things about this film, I was thinking the entire time, gosh, what were they thinking? And so, yeah, I should probably get into it now.
Guess I'll keep on living.
So, I'd like to start off with pointing out that when it comes to adventure movies, or more specifically, treasure hunting adventure movies, there are a lot more terrible films in that category than good films. For every Indiana Jones, there's a dozen really awful treasure hunting movies. It is uncanny, and not a lot of people really talk about this, but I would say that it's probably worse than the equivalent of good to bad zombie films out there. And if you've seen any zombie films, you'll know that there are a lot more terrible zombie films than there are good zombie films. And so when it comes to adventure films, whenever I see an adventure film that the studio actually took the effort to put the money into, it's kind of a breath of fresh air. And so whenever I hear that a huge Hollywood studio is doing an adventure films, and more specifically a treasure hunting adventure films on the scale of like Indiana Jones or Tomb Raider, I kind of get interested, because even though a lot of people will say that the Tomb Raider films, all three of them, were terrible, compared to other adventure films, they're Oscar-worthy masterpieces. And so I will watch those over and over again, because treasure hunting adventure films are very far and few in between. And so when it came to Uncharted, looking at it from a video game aspect, like how is this as an adaptation of a very beloved video game? Not good. How is this as a well-produced Hollywood treasure hunting action adventure film? Pretty good. And I would say this is different than what happened with like Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City. I don't know if I'm putting that on before or after this review, but with that movie, I did point out that yes, if you know nothing about Resident Evil, you will absolutely like that movie, because compared to other zombie movies, objectively, it is better than some of the zombie movies out there. I personally did not like Resident Evil, but then again, I played the video games. And so I found myself in a similar situation with Uncharted. I've played all of the video games at this point, except for Lost Legacy, which I'm about to play very shortly. And going into the story, I hated the story comparing it with Uncharted. Again, as just going at this from an adventure film viewpoint, this was a lot of fun. I did have fun with this movie, but it squandered so many missed opportunities and cool aspects from the video game that kind of made this a mess in reality. And one of the big aspects of this film that I did not like was the casting. Now, really, we can only look at 3 characters in this film with casting compared to other things, because every other character in this film was kind of an original. Correction, 4 characters in this film. Apart from 4 characters, all the other characters were original creations for this film. So that casting was perfectly fine. One of them was heavily based off of the Uncharted character, but it wasn't her. And so the 4 characters are Sam, Nathan, Sully, and Chloe. Sam's not a spoiler because they talked about Sam in the trailer. But honestly, Sam, we didn't really get to see more than just Sam as a younger Samuel Drake. But I thought the casting job for like the teenage Sam Drake was pretty good. And so I thought that was nice. And then with Chloe, I would say Chloe is probably the only other character in the movie that had a decent casting job. But even then, she didn't strike me as Chloe Fraser from the video games, because Chloe Fraser in the video games is kind of supposed to be like this femme fatale, and she didn't really give me that. But at the same time, this was supposed to be like an origin story for like all of the characters, and so this was supposed to be before Nathan Drake was actually Nathan Drake and Sully was Sully, and you know, Chloe Fraser was Chloe Fraser. And so like, she was okay. If I had to change stuff from the film, I probably would not have changed the actress who was playing Chloe Fraser. But when it comes to the 2 main leads, Nathan Drake and Sully, when it comes to those 2 characters, I was disappointed. Now, with Tom Holland as Nathan Drake, credit where credit's due, the dialogue for Tom Holland and his character of Nathan Drake, avoiding kind of his squeaky voice, yeah, the dialogue did match Nathan Drake from the video games. And so I was kind of happy about that. Some of the jokes, some of the snarkiness that Nathan Drake had in the video games, Tom Holland had as well. And so in terms of that, I thought pretty good job. But as the movie went along, Tom Holland was kind of starting to grow on me. And I guess ultimately that's a good thing. He did physically have the presence for it. It's just facially, he still kind of felt like I was looking at the Nathan Drake from the scene in the 3rd game when he first met Sully at the age of like 15 to 17. And Tom Holland, he's one of those actors, he perpetually looks young. And yes, he's only 25, but he doesn't look like he's aged a day over 15. And so he does realistically look like a high schooler. And hopefully he will age a little bit before they do the next one, because this has been successful at the box office. And you know what that means? Sequel. And so I'm hoping that he will be able to age a little bit before the sequel comes out, because he just kind of looked way too young in this film. Now, on the other hand, with Mark Wahlberg as Sully, I like Mark Wahlberg. I enjoy a lot of his work. I think he's done a lot more better films than bad. But in terms of this character, he did not fit. Yes, Mark Wahlberg has had some really great acting performances. You just need to see stuff like The Fighter. But with this movie, it felt like he was just phoning in. Like he was just playing his typical, you know, Bostonian wise guy self. And I did not get any of Sully from Mark Wahlberg, except for maybe at the very end. And even then, it kind of felt half-baked. Now, did I enjoy Mark Wahlberg's character in this movie? If we're not comparing with Uncharted, yeah, he played a good, kind of sleazy Bostonian, you know, anti-hero type character. But he did not feel like Sully at all. And I'm hoping that they will fix these 2 major casting issues in the next one by having Tom Holland hone his craft a little bit in terms of trying to bring Nathan Drake to the big screen, and maybe getting Mark Wahlberg to, you know, kind of give a fuck about the character. And when it comes to casting, in my personal opinion, the two main characters of Nathan Drake and Sully should have been Nathan Fillion and Bruce Campbell. I mean, these guys are like the living human embodiment of these two fictitious characters. And you can even see Nathan Fillion playing Nathan Drake in that really awesome fan film that somehow captures the spirit of the video games better than even the best scene of this film does. But that being said, one of my biggest criticisms of this film is the level of distrust that they have between Nathan Drake and Sully. Because in the games, when they first met, they were kind of like two peas in a pod, terrible expression. They were like two sides of the same coin. I mean, they were like inseparable when they first met, when they established it in the video games. And so these two were basically inseparable. And the way this movie depicts their relationship is they are like antagonistic towards each other constantly. They do not trust each other. They are like a hair's moment away from becoming each other's arch nemesis. And this never happened in the video games. They never had this level of distrust in the video games. And so it makes absolutely no sense why they would have done this. It's just, I mean, like Chloe, that made sense because there was a level of distrust between Chloe and the others, and at the very least in the second video game. And so in terms of that, it just seems like an unnecessary plot point that they forced into this movie. And comparing the video games with this movie, the games hand down beat this all day long. I mean, the quality of the adventure, the story, the acting is far superior than this movie. But a lot of people don't like playing video games, and in terms of actually getting to go and see what Uncharted is all about, this movie, I guess, would be a decent intro for non-gamers who have never experienced Uncharted. Because taking away the Uncharted aspect, it's a decent, fun adventure film. But once you start getting to the video games, you already start seeing all of the holes poked in throughout this movie. Because compared to the video games, this is not great. It's not even good. But as a standalone adventure movie, it's pretty good. If this wasn't called Uncharted, I would be raving about this film non-stop. It is because it is called Uncharted that it is having some serious problems. Something funny though that I did notice was with one of the villains, like Braddock. I did not hate this villain, but there was like just a couple of things that didn't make sense. Like, case in point, the way her hair is. I know this is going to seem very insensitive, but quite frankly, looking at this character, it looks like someone took her against her will, held her down, and started dyeing her hair, but she broke free halfway through and was able to escape. That is how this woman's hair looks in this movie. Like, I don't know what they were going with that, like, the way they set up her hair, but it's just kind of distracting. But this leads into another thing that I kind of noticed is this movie is one of those movies where you shut off your brain because, like, partway through the movie, my friend I went with, she just started laughing. I'm thinking, why is she laughing? And then I realized, I started noticing why she was laughing at the scene, and I just started laughing as well because it's like, no, that's actually really ridiculous, and like I just had turned off my brain. And like another thing that I noticed from another reviewer is if you look at Braddock's like harness that she's wearing, what does that do? It has no advantage whatsoever. It doesn't hold gear. It's not bulletproof. It's just some stupid final harness that she's wearing because it kind of looks tactical. Like, there's absolutely no point for that harness to be there. And then, like, one thing I didn't get was they were taking scenes from all of the games. Like, they took a very iconic scene from the third game And yeah, it was entertaining in this, but they kind of did better in the third game. But like this movie focused mostly on like the fourth game. Like they decided to base the story off of that one the most, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Like, why not base this off of one of the earlier games? Especially since you didn't have one of the characters involved that was a big part of the fourth game. And I know it seems like I'm nitpicking, but like seriously, this is an issue that stops this movie from being truly amazing. If they just didn't call this Uncharted, this would have been a really fun action adventure treasure hunting film. And because they call it Uncharted, I'm kind of like torn between saying this movie's complete junk and saying this movie's okay. If you've never experienced Uncharted before, you're going to absolutely love this movie. If you have played any of the Uncharted games before, you're going to be very, very, very disappointed and probably even hate this film. And so it's kind of a rock and a hard place. I mean, ultimately, yeah, I did enjoy this. I probably will buy it because it's a decent treasure hunting action adventure film that kind of has a little bit too much product placement, but compared to other treasure hunting action adventure films, this is a winner. So, kind of that's been my review of Uncharted with Tom Holland as Nathan Drake. This has been 11th Hour Reviews, and don't forget to, do the thing. And that will be all.